What's up, horror fans? It is Danny from the Lacercast, joined again by Pete, freshly home from Houston, Texas.
Yes.
And we are here to talk about a double dip of indie horror, The Barn and The Barn Part 2, which are both currently streaming on Screambox TV. The original Barn, The Barn from 2016, is also streaming free on Tubi, but Part 2 just came out on Screambox. And I have a pretty cool history with these movies. I got to meet a lot of the cast. Writer-director Justin Seaman, director of photography Zane Hirschberger. I got to meet the all-time great Linnea Quigley years back at the New Jersey HorrorCon and Film Festival. Right before that, this film was premiering at the New York City Horror Film Festival that my cousin used to work for. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that stuck out to me about this movie, and you guys will probably see this when you look it up on Screambox or on Tubi, right, is, especially for The Barn Part 1, was the poster.
Yeah.
And I think one of the first things that I spoke to the director, Justin Seaman, about, and you can, if you go back into the Geeks of Doom archives, you could find an interview that I did with him in around 2017. One of the things I asked him about was the poster art for this and these characters that he created, because one of the things that leapt out about me, to me about this is like a really original Halloween story.
Yep.
This was like Justin Seaman's like dream project. He had like developed this from like notebooks he had written as a kid.
Yeah.
And to see that vision and to, like, you know, when we think of Halloween in the horror community, we think of Michael Myers. We think of, you know, all the horror movies that come out in October. And to go out and to not just make one, but to create two films based on your childhood vision with these brand new Halloween horror characters, I think that's such an impressive feat. What did you think of these movies? Because I really enjoy them for what they are. What do you think of them?
I feel the exact same way. I enjoy them for what they are. And for me, the movies kind of feel like those trailers that were in the beginning of Planet Terror, and then in between Planet Terror and Death Proof, right?
Yeah, Grindhouse. Yeah.
Right. And so I think in the first movie in particular, the film itself is very grainy. Like, it's made to look like it was filmed in the 80s. And so it like really gives off that vibe, especially the first movie. It feels like it's a movie straight out of the 80s, something that you would get at the video store that didn't really have a big release, something that like David Weiner would talk about on In Search of Darkness. And it really fits that mold. And it was a lot of fun. The creatures themselves, you already kind of mentioned them, but the three creatures that are in both of these films, and there's more in the second one, but the Boogeyman, Hollow Jack, and Candy Corn Scarecrow, they're just so cool looking. And they have this like built-in lore that just kind of gets a guy like me excited. So I really enjoyed both of these.
Yeah. One of the things that you just like, the whole 80s feel of this movie, when I was writing my review of the movie back for Geeks of Doom, the original, that like this is going back 2016 or 17, the phrase that I used was retro horror. It's like in movies that are made, and you see this a lot more in Part 2. Part 2, the cast is basically filled out with current members of the horror community who are all part of this, like, this really tight-knit community of filmmakers, actors, who make these very small, very indie, very low-budget horror films, but you could tell right off the bat where all of their inspiration comes from. There's the guy who plays the troop leader in The Barn Part 2 with the long beard.
Yeah.
He's his name's Drew Marvick,
Okay.
and he's the writer director of a movie called Pool Party Massacre that I
Oh,
stumbled across at another horror festival back in like 2016, 2017.
yeah.
And I didn't realize I was in the movie theater watching it, and he just happened to be sitting next to me, and I turned to him. I'm like, "So, you have like a movie? Are you here for like a film?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, my movie's actually premiering tonight." And I'm like, "Oh shit, what's it called?" And he goes, "It's this one, Pool Party Massacre." And it was like I was like sitting like right near him, and he's like this totally down to earth, really fun guy. So many of the other actors in, especially in part two,
Yeah.
are you have actresses who were in like Don't Fuck in the Woods and Don't Fuck in the Woods Part Two, which are both, I believe, streaming on Tubi.
Nice.
You have there's even this crazy headshot in the Barn Part Two in the yearbook. There's a headshot in the yearbook that they show of an actor, Wayne Johnson, who plays the villain in Night of Something Strange, a horror movie by another director named Jonathan Strayton, who I've met several times. I interviewed for Geeks of Doom. He had a horror Night of Something Strange was premiering at the New York City Horror Film Festival the same year that The Barn was. So it's like you have this like tightly knit. It's like super cool to see this like tightly knit group who they might not make movies together all the time, but they're always like helping each other out and being a part of each other's films. It's just it's like this really cool thing in the horror field. You don't get to see that very often.
No, no. It kind of reminds me of what you're saying of like the horror authors that I've kind of interacted with in the past couple of years, like going to the Ghoulish Book Festival and just going to some signings and stuff where everybody is really nice. Like what they say about horror, whether they're talking about horror filmmakers or horror writers, is that you think they're going to be the most deranged, kind of twisted people, but they're the nicest people, and they're just so like friendly. And, the fact that he's sitting next to you in the theater and he's all chill instead of being all snooty, even though you're watching his movie, like they're just kind of humble. And with this movie, you can feel the love. Like it feels it's like it kind of reminds me of like Trick or Treat too, where like first of all, like what I'll say about this movie in general is that I love the aesthetic of like the Halloween time itself, right? Where you got like the barn, the literal fucking barn, which is the title of this, right? But like the barnyard and the hay bales and people wearing overalls and then there's a fucking scythe. Like I love that kind of imagery. It just always gives me a certain feeling. And this movie like is like just soaking in it, both of them. It's interesting that you mentioned two, and then you start talking about all the people that are in it because there's like this drastic jump in cameos between the two movies, right? Like I'm watching the first one, I'm like, oh, this is this cool little low budget movie that feels like a fleshed out Grindhouse trailer, and then all of a sudden, like the second one's got fucking Diana Prince, Joe Bob.
Yeah, Joe Bob and Darcy are in
Darcy,
it.
right? Darcy the mail girl.
Doug Bradley, it just shows up at like he has like a couple lines on the couch. I remember you messaged me. You're like, that's fucking Pinhead, right? I'm like, just hanging out.
So I had a question for you because you know a lot more about horror and you know a lot more about these people. So what's the deal with Dr. Rock? Who's that? Because he's in both movies.
That's Ari Lehman.
Okay.
Ari Lehman is, as his band would tell you, he was the first Jason. He is the little kid at the end of the original Friday the 13th that comes out of the water and grabs Alice. He is first Jason, and he has a band. He actually does play the keytar, which is why he actually has the keytar, which he uses as a weapon in part two.
Right.
He's another guy I've met at a couple horror conventions, and he actually, there was one New Jersey Horror Con and Film Festival where his band actually played, and it's so he's Dr. Rock, and the other notable cameo back from part one is Linnea Quigley,
right?
And that I know from interviewing the director years back, one of his favorite movies from the 80s was Night of the Demons. So to get to work with Linnea Quigley, who has a very infamous part of that movie. She's trash in Return of the Living Dead. She's in the
Right.
original Silent Night, Deadly Night. She's notorious for basically being the woman who is in every shower scene in the 80s and if there's nudity in a movie in the 80s, is about a 70% chance that it was Linnea Quigley.
Right.
And
in these movies, she plays the exact opposite. She's like this, like,
the fact that she's playing this like holier than thou woman, it reminds me of when Kevin Smith cast George Carlin as the priest in Dogma. Like where like the fans who get it, it's going to be really freaking funny. And like anybody who doesn't get it just gets to watch that actor play this part. But like, yeah.
So, okay. So you're telling me a couple of the cameos. I was also interested in the band that's in the first movie, right? Because the soundtrack was made by a guy named Rocky Gray. And then I think that he's in the band that it plays in the concert in the first movie.
In the Hootenanny scene.
And they'll get slaughtered. Yeah.
Oh, that scene is probably my favorite part of the first movie.
Yeah.
The Hootenanny scene where the door gets locked. I don't know how deep you got into the Hellraiser franchise, if you even got anywhere into it.
Not really, yeah.
Because that reminds me of a scene in Hellraiser 3.
Okay.
Where there's like this like dance party at a club and like the Cenobites lock all the doors and kill everybody inside.
Oh, okay. Well, I do want to watch more of that franchise, but so far I've just done the first two and the reboot. But
there's not much more you need to watch.
Right. But I was gonna say that one thing I didn't bring up. One point I wanted to make too was it also reminds me of the studio that made Psycho Goreman, right? And
Ashton 6.
Right, exactly. And then the guy that we interviewed too, the director,
Steven Kostanski.
Thank you, and your good memory, man. Yeah, like that's kind of the vibe I was getting watching both films. I was like, it's just really kind of creative, practical effects and like crazy gore, like over the top gore, and just like it's so like gory and ridiculous to where it's like comical.
Yeah, Charlotte actually walked in and like hung out with me while I was watching The Barn 2, and she kind of walked in the middle, so she wasn't watching it, and she was not really paying attention. So every once in a while, she would look up, and she would see like a head get sliced in half, and she would literally turn to me and go, "Whoa, that was a really cool effect."
Yeah.
So it was impressive to her, and she's seen more than your average 12-year-old has seen with horror. So they definitely nobody's going to watch these two movies. Let's just say this straight. Nobody's going to watch these two movies and go, well, those are the two greatest horror movies ever made. They are what they are, but what they are is, like we've been describing, these fun kind of throwback to the 80s slasher, demon slasher movies. And they put the money into, I feel like in the first one, a lot of the money went into these three characters that you mentioned, the Boogeyman, the Candy Corn Scarecrow, and Howard Jack.
Right.
They looked really cool.
Yes.
So a lot went into that and the gore effects. And then in part 2, it just ups the ante with the gore effects. And
yes.
Like you got heads going every which way and all sorts of crazy shit going on.
My favorite kill, I mean, we're kind of jumping all over the place, but my favorite effect is in the second one. I can't remember which one of the sorority sisters it is, but the crow has like this blade and it like chops off the front of her face. Right. And so you see these like kind of holes where her eyes would have been and like her nose, and you just hear this noise of like kind of choking, and she's still kind of squirming around like she might still be alive. It's fucking awful, but awesome too, Yeah. So let's talk about like the actual characters in the lore. Like you mentioned, we keep mentioning these three characters are in both movies. Which of those monsters do you like the best? The Boogeyman, Hollow Jack, or the Candy Corn Scarecrow?
I in the first movie, I really liked the look of Hollow Jack. Yeah. I like the idea of the the pumpkin head with like the inside of the pumpkin is on fire.
Right.
You watched when we were growing up, did you watch the Ghostbusters cartoon?
Shit, yeah.
He reminded me of Sam Hain. Remember,
Yes,
like
yes.
the pumpkin demon of Halloween? Like
I sure do.
And that was like my favorite character on that show, like my favorite ghost on that show. And that's what he reminded me of. In part 2, I think I don't know. Like I think I liked I was used to those three already, so I liked some of the other villains. I liked that all of a sudden, out of nowhere, like now everybody's just there are zombies everywhere.
Right.
I like that there's like a zombie horde at the end of the movie. I like that they have these like giant pig monster and crow monsters that come out of the barn.
Yes.
And you know, we've mentioned the lore, but the lore comes from really these two main characters from the first movie.
Right.
Played by Mitchell Mussolino and Will Stout.
Right.
And they really Mitchell Mussolino's character.
Right.
Who
Sam.
and he basically like came up with he heard about these characters from like his grandfather, who like the movie opens and the first thing you see is like a little girl get like her head cut off in like the 1950s, and you're like, oh, I'm in for that kind of movie.
Yeah, no, she doesn't get her head cut off. She gets like a fucking scythe like through the top of her head.
Yes, right through.
Yeah.
and you know, so he like has grown up hearing these like stories, and it goes back to like that whole trick or treat idea of Halloween of like. You have to you're only allowed to do this if you don't get candy. Like if somebody knocks on your door and you don't give them candy, then you have to do a trick on them. But if you do a trick on somebody who gave you candy, now you've violated the rules. And it's like this kind of, I don't want to say complex, but it's like this really kind of, it gives the movies plural a backstory and like a kind of like it hammers them down into reality almost of like, okay, I like this. This feels like this because this is a very small town America movie. It's not like this movie takes place in New York.
No.
So like you can totally see this being like, in our corner of Arkansas, this is what we think of this movie. This is what these are our Halloween traditions.
Right. Yeah, I mean, that's what I liked about the first one so much was that when you meet Sam, like first of all, they have like this setup that's like their own little Halloween trick-or-treat station, and they're kind of going over the lore with the kids that are trick-or-treating. And it kind of reminds me of a couple of Halloween stops I have in my own neighborhood where there's just a little side. There is this one garage that is nearby my house where these dudes have a bunch of like puppets set up, and there's a guy that's sitting with like a cloak over his face. And he looks kind of like a reaper. And then he's like, go get some candy over there. And then like a goblin puppet that looks like it was fucking made by Jim Henson Studios comes out and like tries to get you. And I love that shit. I love when people are like so into Halloween that they go that extra mile and they make a fucking narrative out of their fucking haunt. Well, and that's what these, go ahead.
No, that's like, the whole idea of like haunts and like people going to these haunted hayride exhibits and they kind of do that that's like the whole premise of part 2 is they turn the barn into this sorority sister haunted attraction.
Right. And and like the in the first one, you're following Sam around and he's just like very matter of fact and he's talking about this crazy lore. And then at one point you meet this guy that's at the Hootenanny and he's like really into the fucking lore. And he's like, I smashed all these pumpkins just so that this guy wouldn't come back. And he's like making a fucking spear so he can go take on these 3 creatures and they just fucking obliterate him. That was one of my favorite parts in the first movie. That guy who's like a lunatic just making a spear. But I mean, you know me, that I like when movies have like weird lore that's attached to them. That's not just like, oh, it's a demon and we summon the demon. It's like weird rules and shit, like, and stuff that's just odd to begin with. Like, this movie's just odd to begin with. They have to like collect the flesh to give to the devil, right, to complete the ritual, you know, and like the creatures, the pig creatures and stuff that you see in the second one, that kind of reminds me a little bit of like Phantasm too. So like, I just like weird lore that's built into shit like this.
Yeah, and you know, that's what I really like about these two movies, is that for horror fans, they're super accessible. There's no like, yeah, if you're like the type of person who goes to a movie once in a while, these movies are probably not for you. But if you're a horror movie fan, like, you're just going to get a kick out of the practical effects, the gore, all the cameos. Like, you're going to have a ton of moments where you're like, I know that guy. Oh, yeah, there's Darcy. Like, oh, there's Lloyd Kaufman. And like, oh, there's the guy who played Jason for the first time. And you're just going to have like a ball watching these movies. And, you know, I really respect like the vision that, you know, Justin Seaman, the writer director, has to like take a story that he had as a kid to flesh it out. From talking to him years ago and from looking on IMDb, like the first movie had a ton of problems, production problems. Okay. And like he had to like basically go back in and like get as many people from the cast as possible to just finish the movie. And to a point where he actually is playing the boogeyman, I think, in part one. He might even play the boogeyman in both movies. Because he like couldn't get somebody to like do the makeup for it. So, and like, it's like literally a family affair. I know like his wife did like production stuff on the movie. They did like, I think a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo for part two. Not going to brag, but I did see my name in the credits. Yeah. So, you know, like, but like you watch the credits and you know, when you watch a low budget horror film and you watch the credits, you tend to see the same names over again because it's a small production. So people are wearing multiple hats and, you know, you're doing the makeup and then you're doing the sets and then you're doing the makeup and then you're, you know, the shooting parts of the movie. And then, oh shit, the actor couldn't make it today. Hey, just here, put this mask on and go play that character, you know?
Yeah.
And
I was thinking that, especially during like the Hootenanny slaughter scene, I was like, how many of these people are just like the cousins of the filmmaker or like, you know, their friend or like the guy that works at the coffee shop, you know, that's just like getting their eyeball ripped out or like, you know, their intestines are getting eaten or whatever, you know, like it must have been so much fun just like filming it.
Yeah, no, I noticed that a lot more with the end credits of part two, where it was like the same names keep coming up, but I was like, all right, but it adds to, I think it adds to the charm of the movies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it reminds me because one movie that I'm a big fan of that's just like this, where it has like no budget, a lot of gore, is Christmas with the Dead. That is, you know, it's based on that Joe Lansdale story. And it's charming, even though it's like this like total low budget, goofy movie. And it just reminded me of this. And I know like my friend was in it and he plays like a zombie a couple of times. You know, you just do what you can. And I think that the level of makeup effects is like kind of a cut above in both films, especially the second one. So I was wondering about like the second one, as far as like the cameos and stuff like that. You mentioned that there's these girls that are from this movie, Don't Fuck in the Woods. Is that like Julianne Prescott and Kaylee Williams?
Yes.
Okay.
A couple of them. You also had Alice Winkler, who was in a ton of like low budget horror films, including one called Space Babes from Outer Space.
And there's that friend Michelle who's in both movies. Like she's a supporting character in the first one, then she's kind of like the main character in the second one. She's played by Lexi Drips, and I was wondering if like
the most porn star name I've ever heard for somebody who, as I know, is not a porn star.
Okay. You basically went ahead and said it. Yeah, I was gonna be like, right. So she's in both of them. And then I actually thought she was really good. I thought that her acting was good in both of them. I really liked the two main guys in the first movie too. I really liked
Yeah,
Sam and Josh.
I like that. It's That's another thing that I like about part two is that it's not just like, let's go back and make another movie with all these like people who have been in horror movies before. There is the continuity. Like the Barn 2 is a sequel.
Oh yeah.
There is the continuity of characters. There's a continuity of story that I really like. Like it even starts with the evil preacher from the end of part one is at the what do you call it? The campfire, and he's dressed as like a Boy Scout leader, and it's like that's how the monsters come from the barn. You mean like that barn that you made us knock on 3 times?
And even the second one, it's funny because like in the first one, they get that little girl right in the beginning, and it's pretty rough. I'm like, whoa, okay, this is intense. But then in the second one, they just like slaughter these Cub Scouts.
Yeah.
Like right in the very beginning, they're just like eating them and like ripping out their eyes and shit. I didn't mention this before, but when we were talking about which of the monsters were our favorites, my favorite's the Boogeyman. And I kind of like that he like rips off scalps and then wears the people's hair on his head. And then he's got like a minor hat. And that's kind of like a callback to My Bloody Valentine. There's all these like little homages. And I think that in the second one, the candy corn scarecrow, like his look is better in the second one. Like they definitely like improved on because they make him look like a fucking corn cob in the second one, yeah, I mean it's a lot of fun. And then we were talking about the cameos before and like just these random kills. Like you said before that people aren't watching this for like oh, this is this great well put together horror movie. Is it going to get nominated for an Oscar? Obviously not, right? They're just watching it for like the crazy kills, the crazy gore, and then maybe like a little bit of this weird lore, right? And like in the second one, it's just like kill after kill after kill, and scene after scene after scene, and like. This is one scene where one of the sorority girls just starts to just do this dominatrix routine right in the middle of this barn, and then the fucking Hollow Jack gets involved, and it's almost like one of the girls gets turned into like Poison Ivy from Batman, right? She's got vines and she's shooting them, and just so random. Who is the guy that was gonna get the dominatrix?
I didn't write his name down, I don't think, but.
He was a definite creep. He's like sitting in the chair, like, "Oh yeah, let's go."
I like that his character was also the guy who got their sorority shut down last year because he was, paying them to strip at a car wash or something.
Right.
There's so many of these little things. The farmer in part 2 is played by John Hale III. John Hale III. Was a co-director of a new horror anthology that is coming out called Worst Laid Plans. I saw that at the New York City Horror Film Festival last year. So it's like for me especially as somebody who like has met a lot of these people at conventions and film festivals, it's like it's kind of like I'm not friends with them, but there's a kinship amongst horror fans. And, I'm watching the new Robert Englund documentary on Screenbox now, Hollywood Dreams and Nightmares. I'm almost done with it, and you guys can all stay tuned for a review of that when I'm done. Right. But, I met Robert Englund so many years ago, probably 18, 19 years ago at a horror convention. And I still remember the interaction. I still have the picture saved somewhere. And it's like, you never forget these things. Like, it's very rare to go to a horror convention and meet a real asshole. Getting to meet these people, most of them are just regular people who have real jobs. And then they make movies and they act and they write and they direct in their spare time and on the weekend. And, you really get to see how talented these people are, especially like the writer directors, when they don't have the budgets, that any movie you go to see in the movie theater is, even like the bad ones have, multi-millions of dollars. And, like I walk out of Ant-Man Quantumania and I'm thinking like, how did they do that with like hundreds of millions of dollars in their budget? How did they make that movie? Yeah. And then I see like a movie like The Barn 2 and the effects in that movie.
Yeah.
With the probably like tens of thousands of dollars that they had, or maybe $100,000. They're literally crowdfunding money to make the movie, and they have better effects than like multi-million dollar big budget studio films.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Believe me, I know. It's amazing what they can do with restraints, right, or constraints. It's just like, oh well, this is what we got, this is what we can make. And it is just like Psycho Goreman, where they make it work. They're like, okay, well, this is what it's going to look like, so we have to make the movie look like this. And it just fits. It just looks like it's straight out of the 80s. I know, like I saw reviews on IMDb and stuff, and that's what people said. Like, oh, if they're trying to make like an 80s movie, and this is supposed to take place in like 1989, I think, the first one. And then the second one's like 1991, I think.
Yeah.
But and I think that's probably why it's so near and dear to our hearts, right? Because like 1989, you and I would be like 7 years old or so. And then 91 would be, I don't know, I'm doing math, 9 or 10, So it's like right at that
2 years.
I'm sorry, man. I just got back from Houston, man. But yeah, I just really recommend it. I remember like watching the first scene of the first movie and being like, oh, what's Daddy making me watch? Is this going to be kind of rough? And it's just because he kind of knows these people, like, we're going to watch this, but it's like, no, this is fucking fun. And I would watch 9 movies like this over watching one movie that has like an awesome budget and is like real serious, but dull, like a real dull horror movie. I just want to watch fun, quirky horror movies that cost like nothing, instead.
Yeah. I enjoy both of these. I think if you're somebody around our age, maybe a little bit older, who you grew up in the 80s, you went to video stores, these are definitely the kinds of movies that you will enjoy. Right. You said it earlier, these are the types of movies that in the In Search of Darkness 2 and 3, like you would hear David Weiner talk about, and you'd have how different is a movie like this from The Prowler, or a movie like that, or Cellar Dweller. Now I know like The Prowler had Tom Savini doing the makeup effects, and Cellar Dweller was written by the guy who would go on to do the Chucky movies, but Don Mancini. But still, it's like these are right in that level.
Yeah. Right, exactly. I could totally see like In Search of Darkness, and then Corey Taylor be like, then there's this one part when Darcy, the male girl's nipple gets bitten off by a crow. It's just like I can't remember, something bites off her nipple. She gets pretty fucked up. She gets attacked by like I think multiple things at once.
Yeah, she gets like gang killed.
Yeah,
it's funny you mentioned him because he's also a talking head in the Robert Englund documentary on Screambox too.
Cool. Yeah, and also, and one last thing, since we're kind of talking about Darcy too, is that Joe Bob has a cameo in this. We already mentioned this, but I really like how he essentially is like doing his like list of things like you would on the last drive-in.
Yeah, he's at a point now like where he's in the horror zeitgeist, and he doesn't even try to hide the fact. And the funny thing about him is that he like did try to be an actor.
Yeah.
And like he's in Casino.
Oh shit.
He's in Martin Scorsese's Casino. He gets chewed out on screen by Robert De Niro.
Holy
in the
shit.
Movie. And like I remember watching that a few years ago and going like, oh fuck, that's Joe Bob. And like he's in the original Stand that Mick Garris did, the TV series. So he was an actor for, while he was also, of course, a horror critic and a writer, he was also dabbling in acting, and but now it's to a point where if he's going to do a cameo, he's basically just playing himself.
Pretty much. Yeah. Yeah, but I really enjoyed this a lot. This was a nice little break. We just covered the whole second season of Yellow Jackets. Now we're kind of getting back into our movie reviewing mode. There isn't a lot of stuff in theaters right now. Now it's kind of like the comic book time. On my other channel, Brian and I actually just covered Across the Spider-Verse,
which I'm going to try to go see in about an hour or so. We'll see.
And then me in an hour or so, I'm going to go see Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. So both of us will be in the theater. But did you want to tell them what you've been reviewing and like what we're covering?
So yeah, we're good. We are going to start our Wes Craven kind of retrospective this weekend. With replacing Yellow Jackets, we will get in some Wes Craven stuff. Do we know what movie we're going to be reviewing first? Did we say?
Oh shit! I'm down for The People Under the Stairs because I've never seen it. I know you really love that one. Yeah. I don't know if you want to go in like a chronological order because I've actually never seen.
No, we don't have to. Like I feel like anything Wes Craven that's not a Nightmare movie and not a Scream movie,
right?
With the exception, of course, of the movie Serpent and the Rainbow, which we covered when we did Cursed Films.
Yeah.
He made a lot of these movies that kind of slipped under the radar.
Yeah.
And The People Under the Stairs is, for my money, it might be my favorite Wes Craven movie, and it completely falls under the radar. So I was just talking to Charlotte about watching that with her, so I would love to watch that and meet you on Saturday to review that. As far as stuff that I have up on the channel, last Thursday I had an absolutely amazing time. I went to the New York City premiere of Brooklyn 45 from writer-director Ted Gagan, who directed We Are Still Here and Mohawk. It premieres, I think you're probably going to post this on Friday, this video.
Yes.
So if you're watching this on Friday, June 9th, it will be on Shudder. It premieres on June 9th. I got to see it at the IFC Center. Ted Gagan was there. Members of the cast were there. Jeremy Holm, Larry Fessenden, who one of the most famous horror producer, director, actors in New York horror. He's in the movie. He was there. And then, I was all set to go home. And the next thing I know, I spent 3 hours out at a bar with the cast and crew. My cousin, Adam, who has horror movies that he's worked on. He knows everybody there. He worked on a movie called The Ranger that I reviewed for Geeks of Doom. The Ranger himself, Jeremy Holm, is in Brooklyn 45. Jen Wexler was there. Members of Shudder were there. Former members of Shudder were there. It was just a great night. And most importantly, the movie is fucking great. It's one of those horror movies that it's as of right now, June, first, second week of June, it's probably in my top 5 to 10 of the year. And I don't mean horror movies, I mean of movies now.
Okay.
It's what I love. One of my favorite things is a confined thriller. And this movie is effectively set in real time. 5 characters doing a seance in a brownstone in Brooklyn in 1945, right after World War II. 4 of the 5 people in the room are World War II vets who have some figurative and literal ghosts that they're dealing with. The only thing I will say, and I say this in my review, is if you look at the poster kind of gives off a comedic vibe.
Okay.
It's much more serious than it is comical. There are some funny moments. There's some really good dialogue in there that you might chuckle at, but it is in no way a comedy. It is almost more drama than it is, or suspense than it is pure horror. And then there's great real horror in it. So it was a great job by Ted Gagan, the writer-director there. That's going to be on Shudder tomorrow. I have a review up on the channel, full review if you guys want to check that out.
Nice.
Also, Sunday night, speaking of going to the city and seeing movies, I'm going to Tribeca Film Festival, and I'm going to be seeing Suitable Flesh, starring Barbara Crampton and Heather Graham.
Oh,
the new film by Joe Lynch, which is based on a H.P. Lovecraft story.
That's fucking cool.
So H.P. Lovecraft and Barbara Crampton, it kind of feels like almost like it might be a spiritual successor to like Reanimator and From Beyond and Castle Freak.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm really excited to see that. Sunday night I'll be doing that, so you can expect a review of that probably Monday. So
okay, that's fucking awesome, man. Holy shit, I'm kind of jealous. I want to watch that Ted Geoghegan movie too. You know, I just saw that I was actually dropping on Shudder. I was like, oh yeah, because I really liked what is it? It's We Are Still Here. Yeah, I like that one a lot.
The guy knows how to do ghost stories. The guy is good at ghost stories. And yeah, We Are Still Here was great. Larry Fessenden and Barbara Crampton were in that. And this movie is excellent. Excellent.
Nice, man. Okay.
Very different, very, very different from The Barn and The Barn 2, which are super duper fun and like gross and tons of fun gore effects. Brooklyn 45, very different.
Okay. All right. Well, as you guys can fucking see, Danny definitely loves horror and is posting on the channel constantly. Check out his shorts. Check out his full-length reviews. Check out my reviews with him at least once a week.
Oh, my short reviews. Okay.
Yes, and his shirts, too. He usually has good shirts on if you're watching us.
Not today. This is just an old rugged maniac shirt.
Okay. But usually, like 9 out of 10 times, he's got something topical. Yes. But anyway, we will be back then. Next week, you'll see us covering The People Under the Stairs, our first Wes Craven movie of the summer. So we'll catch you all guys next